Okay. So I'm going to slack these commands out. We have them. Today we're just going to do like a little like a fun facts app. So where we're able to create facts whether they're true or not. So but yeah, those are the commands. So let's go ahead. If you want to, you can make a new, before you run this, you can make a new directory since it's a different week. Okay, so we're going to run this Rails new command, but it's going to be different. So we still do the Rails new and then the name of our act. So I'm going to call this React with Rails on facts. I'll also append this with winter 21. So same thing, and let me make this bigger. But we're going to do a -d Postgres. PostgreSQL for this. I cannot see if I spelled that right. Zoom is blocking that up. Okay. And then here's where, this is what we're going to do differently. We're going to use this -- API flag. Now this is going to tell Rails that we're only going to use Rails as an API, meaning Rails isn't going to be sending any of the views. So like our MVC of Rails, now it's just going to be like the MC. Kind of saying, hey, we don't really, as an API, you're not really concerned about sending the view part of that app. So that's definitely going to be a different step for your setup, is to make sure you use this -- API flag. Cool. Then like we normally would, we can just cd into that. Let's go ahead and just create our database. Nothing new there. We're going to create a model. So we're going to have a fact model because this is going to be an app of facts. So a fact is going to have some text. It's going to have stars, which is going to be a float. And it's going to have a source and a username. And these are all, remember, if I don't give it the type, those are just going to be strings by default. Go ahead, create that model. So I'm going to create a controller. So we have a fact model, so I'm going to do a facts controller. Now something I'm going to do though, and this is going to be different, and this is more of a convention thing. It's not going to change, it's going to change how it works, but it's just kind of a convention that we're going to use. I'm going to now, like for all of my routes and all of my, for my API, I'm going to append them with API. It just can be nice because, and you'll see this kind of used in other like APIs where all of their paths are going to be prepended with API. And that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to go ahead, railsg controller API facts, and then I'm going to run this command just to skip the routes. So this isn't going to auto generate any routes for me in my routes.rb file. Now notice here, we created our facts controller, same thing. It's now also in our controllers, it's in an API folder. So it's controller's API facts controller is where that's going to live. And I can also migrate my database since I did a Rails G model. And let's go ahead. I'm just going to slack out some seats file for us. So we can open this up in code. Let's go ahead and open up our seats file and paste that in there. So we just have a couple of hard-coded facts. I think there's like 5 of them, just with some kind of dummy data. So go ahead and run Rails dbc. So I think one of the things as we kind of get into like Rails as an API and React as like our single page application as our front end, one thing I think that's nice about this is that this really creates 2 separate parts of our app, and that creates a very easy way to break work up and kind of, kind of divide and conquer type stuff. So divide and conquer is a very common term in coding. It's, you take a big problem, you split it up, and then you conquer those easier problems. So the more you can divide and conquer in coding, that's a pretty good like problem solving strategy, breaking up work. So you're going to have a hackathon this weekend. One way you could have all 4 of you be working at the same time, or you could break this up and have 2 of you work on a part and the other 2 work on another part. So one way we can really divide and conquer with this is we can break this up into a front end and a back end pretty easily. So notice right now, I'm kind of going to I'm like putting on my back end developer hat right now. I don't even care about the front end. Not even concerned about that. My front end could be a mobile app, it could be in React, it could be jQuery, vanilla JavaScript. I don't care. It doesn't matter, because right now I'm just doing the back end development. And the way we develop APIs, I don't need to know what they're using as a front end. So let's go ahead and start building out our back end and start doing our Crud actions on our back end. So we have a fact model and a fact controller. So I can just start building this out. And what I do want us to use today, I did a demo on it with on Friday, is this Postman app. So I'm going to select this out. Because the one thing that's nice to have when you're testing your backend is, it's nice to have that UI to actually, fill out a form and hit send and test out your data. Like, are your paths working? Are your routes working? But writing out a front end is going to take forever just for testing. So we're going to use this Postman app to help us test our backend. Let me just get rid of these. Okay, so I'll give you some time to get that downloaded. Then yeah, we'll kind of use this. Kind of want to get it set up to where you might see it. But just download that, we'll kind of get back to it because we don't have anything to actually test with it. But we have seeded our database. I could, because let's look at some ways we could test our backend. We can use the Rails console. It could be like a fact.all. Yeah, that way I could see, you know, that I'm going into the database, that they are in the database, but it's not that great because I can't really test my controller with the Rails console. I can go in and test my model. I can do some of that stuff, but yeah, I can't really test my model, or sorry, my controllers with this. So let's go ahead and see how we can test our controllers. So let's go in our app. Let's first define a route. Now, something I'm going to do with the routes that is, once again, this is not necessary for like an API. This is just a convention because I want to prepend the name, my routes with an API. So I'm going to use a namespace API do end. And then I could do my standard routes like get facts to API slash facts index. Might not need this. I'm gonna have to see. I'm probably just gonna use resource routing, but let's look at this. So if I want to check my routes, I need to start up my server. Let's do a Rails S. Let's go ahead and look at localhost 3000 Rails info routes. Oh yeah, okay, it did it for me. I don't need that here. So I'm just going to go AP facts index. That added. But I do, because where I do want it to go. So here's the get request. I'm going to do a get to /API/facts. And that's going to take me to API/facts index. Because why I wanted to go to /API facts is because I now, since I'm when I did my Rails G controller API/facts, Now my facts controller lives in this API folder. You know, I might even, I mean, this is you don't need to do this. This is more demo. Because another thing I might could do is maybe I do like a Rails G controller. I'm just gonna call this like examples. But like I want this to be like in an API folder, like a version 1 examples. Because maybe I have like I have the same controller examples, but maybe over time my API changes. So I have different versions. So what I can do is, this is a way I can kind of version my API. We're not going to do this, but I could, you know, have different namespaces here. Namespace LV1 do end. I could do a get to like examples. You know, to example index. And then I could also have like because I could have a version 2 API, you know, that does the same thing. So it's like, what version of my API are you using? This is just a way I could namespace it, and like I could kind of maintain both versions. So I'm going to delete these though, because we're not going to do that. Does this make sense? With all I'm doing, I don't have to do this. This is just a little thing we're doing to change our API, like change our API so it's like all of our routes are now appended with API. So instead of going to localhost 3000/facts, so I need to start my server. Instead of doing that, see, this is a get, this is a 404. I don't have a route that matches that. I'm going to do API/facts. And there we go. Something else I'm going to do, we're not going to, I think we spent a lot of time on this last week. So for now I'm just going to go ahead and do resource routing. So I don't have to write all these out. Resources facts. This is going to go through and build out all of our routes for our standard CRUD actions. And from here on out, this is probably how I'm going to do it, because this is a lot quicker. And I think we've done enough with routes. See, now I have a get, like I have a get API/facts. That takes me to my index. A post to API facts. That takes me to my create. A get API facts ID takes me to my show. Got my 2 put and patches for my update, my delete. Also notice how my new and edit paths are missing. Remember when we do resource routing, that includes those, right? Those are part of our standard actions. So why are they missing here? Any ideas? This one's a little tricky, but this has to go when we first created this app and we use this -- API flag. Like Rails now knows it's just an API, like it knows it's not meant to render any views. So when we do resource routing now, it's like, well, we don't need to do the new or edit methods because we don't need to return any forms. Because remember, new and edit just return the form. And since we're an API, we're not ever going to return those. that make sense? Also, if you look at our app, we do have a views folder, but we're not going to have like views that go along with our controllers and models, which really hasn't been the case anyway since we've been using React. But cool. All right, so let's just build this out. I'm going really slow. If there's any, feel free if you have any questions. I kind of want this to go slower than faster. So if there's anything that's unclear, feel free to interrupt me. Cool. So let's start building out our, and I'm going to delete these controllers so they're not messing this up, getting this messy. So Rails D controller, API v1, examples, and the version 2. Did I not? I just need to delete these files. All right, I guess it didn't automatically delete these folders. Okay, so in our controllers, we have an API folder and we have our facts controller. So let's go start editing this. So we want to start doing our Crud actions. So this is going to be just like the homework where we're rendering JSON. So this is going to be, should be a review of last week. So for our index, we just want to render JSON fact.all. Now I can test this. I think something that is always going to be useful is, if you write code and you can test it to make sure it's working. Because we've done quite a bit of steps. We're kind of like setting up our controllers. We set up all of our routes. Now we're doing our index method. So I want to go see if this is working. So I can test this out by now going to my web browser, localhost API/facts. And there we go. As far as the backend, that's all I need to do. This is all this backend needs to do. It gets a GET request to API/facts and it returns all the facts as JSON. Cool. Simple enough. And this is why it's nice as a back. I don't care what the front end does with this. I don't care if the front end's a mobile app. I don't care if it's a desktop app. I don't care if it's JavaScript, React, Vue, Angular. It's like, here's some data, do whatever you want with this. Cool. Now, our browser's nice, but our browser, we can only do GET requests, and it's hard to send data for our create and update and maybe delete. So this is why we're going to start using Postman to test out our backend, because we don't have a UI. And maybe I want to get all of my backend done before I start working on my UI. So how do I test it out? Because it would be dangerous, especially for you as beginners. I really think it's a big mistake if you try to, if you were to try to code out your whole controller and your backend without testing it. That's going to bite you in the butt for sure. We want to do small changes, test it, and then find the bugs as they come up. Have you started to kind of discover that? If you try to do all your actions in your controller and all of your views all at once, and then you test it, you're not going to get it done. Because you fix one bug, you just go, and then there's just another one that pops up. So if we can do this step by step, it's easier because we know it's easier to like find the bugs. So let's go ahead and start using Postman. All right, so I think this is this kind of how yours is looking? There's not really much going on. I want to hit like this plus button on this kind of tab right here. This is the thing I want to see, is like this ability to do like determine the HTTP method and enter the URL. So I want to do a GET request to localhost 3000 API/facts. And that is what I essentially did here. I did a GET request to localhost 3000 API facts. This one I can hit send. And there we go. I can see my data. Now to kind of go back to Madeline's question. So when working with Axios, say this one, working with Axios, I'll say this, what we render is going to come back as, I don't know what the, like, I'm going to call this res.data. But I'm going to say res is a variable name in JS. So this could change. Because in JS, what I'm doing, I'm saying like, I'll do something like this, like let response equal like Axios dot get. See, I'm just naming that variable. Does that make sense? So the res.data, this could be response.data if I name that response. I could actually just destructure this and say data. Because this is coming back as, I mean, really what is coming back as data. But I kind of like to write it as like response. Like this is what's getting sent back with this Axios.get. So if I did like a X and the data, or let's do X like this. You know, change up. So now it's not, now I'm not rendering JSON fact.all. I'm now rendering, you know, this hash that's going to be converted to JSON with the key X and data. So if I send this, now my response, like this is going to come, this is like, if you were to do like a console.log of the res.data, it's going to now look like this, where you have an X key, that's the value is hello. And then in res.data, there's a data key that's the array of objects. So if you wanted to get this array of objects, then that response would be response.data.data. So that's why there's not like a standard thing. It's just however the API is sending it back.
Hey James, my Postman isn't working. Is there a way that I need to get my stuff like running before I run it? It's just saying error connect refused, cannot send request.
Is it this one?
Yeah.
Is that, yeah? Okay, so For this, you do need to have your server running.
So I did do Rails S and it doesn't like run. It's weird. It just,
You want to share your screen because yeah, your server definitely has to be running for Postman to work.
it needs you to stop sharing for a sec.
Scroll, yeah, if you scroll up, so you're getting, let's see if we can find.
Oh, I'm doing something wrong in here.
So you have a syntax error in your routes. So I would just get rid of line 6, just delete that line or comment it out. Yeah, and then restart your, then now your server should work.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Yeah, no problem.
So does Axios create that res variable? That's what you're saying is like, that's a default variable that they do.
No, the response is what I create, like, because this is what it would look like in the JavaScript. That is me, the programmer, creating that. I could call that turkey. And then if I wanted to get this data here, what Axios is doing, it's going to return this. It's going to call whatever this whatever the JSON it renders, it's going to call it data. So turkey, so if I in my JavaScript, I'd say let turkey equals axios.get, you know, API/facts. If I wanted to get X, it'd be turkey.data.x. Because right now I'm rendering this as a object. And then if I wanted to get my facts, that's going to be turkey.data.data. This, so the one thing that Axios is doing is it's going to call this data. But then I might come in and create my own data key. So if I didn't send this back, so let's look at if I send it back just like this, how we had it, fact.all. And I do turkey.data. Now turkey.data, see, that's going to be all the facts. So this data, the axios.get, that's going to like Axios is going to name that data. It's like, I think a better way to see this is like when I refresh it, when I do it in my browser, this is, and I say res.data because that's like normally what I've named that variable. But this right here would be turkey.data. If I called that variable that. If I save this to now it's just doing, because notice how this has the X. So it'd be turkey.x, turkey.data. Or sorry, turkey.data.x, turkey.data.data. But now I'm just doing the fact.all. If I refresh this, or oh, I need to comment that out. Now this is the, you know, X, like this would be like the data, which I could maybe name res.data. Because, and also like if I do this send, because there's going to be other stuff that it's going to like send me back. Like it's not really showing it in here, but it's going to be like sending me back the status. Like here it's kind of doing it like this is a 200 status, which means it was successful. But yeah. Does that help explain? So the response is just whatever you, that word is just whatever you name it in your JavaScript. the axios.get is going to give you back this object. And then on that object, there's going to be a data key, which is going to be whatever you render here.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, and you set it when you're gonna go do your get data call on your app.
Yeah. And yeah, sometimes I could just do like just hard code like fact.all, but I might want to send other information. So then I could do it in a hash. We can maybe call that facts. And then I could send other stuff. So now if I resend this, now I have, here's my res.data, here's the data. And then that data has a fax key, which is my fax. And then it also has the other key, which is that string. I'll kind of just leave that there as an example. But let's just, for this, you know, we just want to render the fact. So I don't really need to, you can just render JSON, the array of stuff. Cool. So that is now working. Now we can go ahead and we can now do our create method. So for my create method, I'm going to want to do my sanitizer just like I normally would. So fact params. So here I'm just making sure my params, you know, when I get parameters sent that there is a fact key. So I'm going to require it, params.require fact. And then I can permit all of the things that are on my fact. So we have I don't know, I always forget the schema. I forget what I have, so I could check out my schema. Schema. So we have text, star, source, and username. So those are the things those are the values I'm going to permit. Text, source, stars, and username. Let's also, just for demo, let's add a validation just so we can test like failing on our back end. So let's go ahead and, so for this, we're going to do this in our fact model. And let's just do a simple one again. Let's just make sure like text is there. So for this, can be a thing that it's going to automatically check before it saves to the database. So these are like validations can help us this way. So what I can do is just say like validates text. And I can say like, hey, I want to just make sure, you know, this is that this value is actually there. So someone sends me a tries to create this and there's like an empty string for text. It's not going to save. Just gonna say, hey, this cannot be blank.
Is this where you could also add other formats? Like if you wanted to require the text to be in an email address format, would you do that here?
Yeah. And that one, like, because there's all sorts of stuff. Like, let's do like Rails validations, email. And we can kind of look at their validations. So like the presence one is pretty common, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff we could validate. So skipping validations. Let's just look at some more other than name. Like terms of service. You can do like a confirmation, like have they got their email confirmation. You can do like a in, like is it in one of these values? The format, this is where like this is something called regular expressions. Regular expressions is a way you can like match characters, so it doesn't match a certain format. For example, this expression, this regular expression right here, is going to make sure that they only entered letters, A through Z, uppercase or lowercase. So if someone tried to do something with a number or a dash or like a symbol, this would not, like this would fail validation. And then you could send a message saying, hey, this only allows for letters. So yeah, inclusion, you know, maybe you have like a size of a shirt. So they have to, like inclusion would say like the value has to be one of these values. It has to be either small, medium, or large. So if they give you anything other than one of those values, it's not going to pass. So this format, this one's really powerful because you can, this is where you can like try to match an email. And you know, maybe you only want numbers. You can do a lot with regular expressions. That's like a lot, but regular expressions are hard. So always this regular expression for email. Like that would be, I don't know, email is a very hard one to do and it's not necessarily going to be valid all the time, but there's a regular expression for email. So I'm not the best with regular expressions, but what that's saying, hey, you know, this can, you know, start with a letter or a number or an underscore or dash. And then we have to have an @ symbol, like that's required. And then it can be followed by, you know, any amount of, you know, numbers, characters, dashes, or underscore. And then we need a dot. And then we need some characters, you know, that need to be greater, like this sequence of characters needs to be greater than 2, but less than 5. I cannot write this on my own without Google. I'm not that good at regular expressions. I can kind of like look at it and kind of see what it's saying, but yeah. So some other things you can do with validations, like a length. You want to make sure you know, the name is greater than 2 characters, or it's less than 500 characters, or it's in between 6 and 20 characters, or it's exactly 6 characters. So length of a character. So that's the length validation. Yeah, maximum, that's kind of the length. They have a special one. Is something a number? Is it a number? Maybe it's you only want integers. So we could do we could do that with our stars, because stars should only be a float. So we could make sure it's a number. There's greater than, so you can see like, you know, with our stars, we might want to make sure it's a number, or we could just make sure it's like greater than 0, but less than 5. That way we could say, hey, we have a, you know, our stars can only be 0 through 5. So lots of validation. So I think when like with a lot of this stuff, it's kind of good to have an idea, but then when you actually want to validate something, you know, this is where you go back to the docs or you see some examples. So we'll just do a basic one because I kind of just want to work with the errors with this so we can kind of see that. So we're going to do one validation just on our text key, and all we're checking to see is just to make sure it's there. And this is like done for you behind the scenes. Like this is before it tries to save to the database, it's going to make sure it's there. So we don't need to do anything other than this. Okay, so let's do our create method. And we're just kind of going to do this as we normally at fact equals fact dot new fact params. So we create this fact in memory and then we try to save it to our database. Okay, so if we save our fact, we just want to render JSON at fact. We're just going to give back the fact that was created. If our fact does not save, we want to render JSON and we want to get back. See, now this is me kind of doing something up here. Like I'm creating this key called errors. Like I'm naming this errors. And I'm going to set this equal to fact.errors. And then I'm going to give this a status 422. In the notes, it says this unprocessable entity. Those are like the same thing. But I could, doing this as text might be better because that's probably a little more readable. Like what is 422? Not quite sure. But doing this as text, this unprocessable entity, it's going to go back as a 422, but it's a little more readable. And what this error is saying, it's saying whatever you gave, the 422, remember that's a 400 error is going to be a client error. It's just saying the data you gave me was bad data to make a fact. For example, if they gave us a fact without any text, because we have that as a validation. Get rid of that. Okay. So now we can test this in Postman. So for this, and if you ever forget your routes, just remember you can always go to localhost 3000 Rails info routes. So we want to go to our create method. So we need to do a post to API/facts. So I'm getting a 400 error. This isn't the unprocessed. This isn't the 422 error. This is a 400 error exactly. It is kind of showing right here the error. Param is missing or the value is empty fact. Another thing you're going to want to, you can always check is your server. So parameter is missing or the value is empty facts. So we started a post request to API facts, but we're not sending it any data. So we're failing right here because I'm trying to call this method fact params and we're looking inside of params and we don't see this fact param. So that fails and that's just going to give us a 400 error. So we're failing right here. We don't even try to save. We just throw that error right there and send back a 400 error. Because what we need to do is we need to send some data. So how we do that in the Postman is we can do that here. I think with params, I think it's this one. So params, we can do key value pairs. Now how you do this is you do the name of your model. So we have a fact model, or that's the thing you want to require. And then the name of your thing. So like the attribute, so like text. And then you can do the value here. Here. I might have actually put this in the wrong spot. Let's go with the. That doesn't look right, or does it? What happens if I do it here? Fact. Oh, sorry, let me just keep it here and then we'll look at the error. So I did fact and then text. Oh, I don't want the colon. I just want to do text and then value. That text. Okay, so header name must be a valid HTTP token. Let's look at this one. Undefined local variable or method fact. Did I mean at fact? So line 16. Oh, well, yeah, that's true. So that I do want to be at fact. That's still failing. But let's look what we get here. I can see my parameters. When I do my post, I do my parameters fact, text, fact here. Unpermitted parameter text. Let's send that again.
What's in your, on the Postman, what's in your headers? Like in your tab right below, yeah, nope. Next to authorization,
Oh, my headers. Oh, let me get rid of that.
because I think it was trying to use that still.
Okay, yeah, let's get rid of that. Let's send that again. Okay, there we go. So yeah, now that's working. How do I know that's working? Is I'm getting back this. This is my response I'm getting back. It's the fact it has the ID, it has the created at, updated at. So I know that actually saved to my database. I can also see this status 200. I could also check my server, see some of the SQL. We don't really know SQL yet, but that's just telling me, completed right here. That was the last thing, completed 200. Okay. Cool. So that's working. But yeah, if we go back to our parameters, because what else do we have? We could do like a fact with like stars. Let's just make sure that's a number. Send that. That works because now I have a fact with some stars. But if I don't send the one with text, because remember text is our one that we're requiring or that we had the validation on. So I'm not going to send that text. And now I'm going to click send. And there we go, errors. And then I'm getting this text, can't be blank. I'm also seeing the status 422 unprocessable entity. Pretty sure I could just, status 200. Send that back as a 200 status. I think if I don't have this, if I don't give it the status, I'm pretty sure that's just going to be. If I don't give it the specific status and I render some JSON, that's a good response. So why do I come in here and say like, give it this bad status? Because this is like, it's successful in the fact where it's successfully giving back some data. This is successfully going to give back this data to the front end. But I'm going to give them back, the 422 error or message or response, I should say. This will actually in like when we talked about, you remember the try catch block? If we get a 422, that will actually cause an error to occur if we get back a 422. So that will go to our catch block. So that's one of the reasons I'm giving back this 422 status. I need to let them know like it didn't successfully save. So if I didn't put this here, I would give them back a 200 status and they would think it worked. So I specifically say, hey, you know, this did not work because you gave me bad data. And then I'm saying errors here. I'm just calling that errors. I could do that like as X, render JSON X, but the value of that is going to be the @fact.errors. Send that X text, can't be blank. And, you know, let's do like the, where was the, let's just do this one, just so we can have more than one. Because we could also do something like, you know, our stars. Just saying, hey, that has to be a number. So we can do multiple validations. And so then now if I did like stars as like, you know, hello. Now my errors, now I'm going to get back a couple of errors. I'm just going to say, hey, text can't be blank. Stars is not a number. But yeah, I don't want to call that X. I should call that errors. Or maybe I could just send that back like that. I think this one is probably going to be a little better to like say, hey, errors. Might make that a little more easier to see, like errors. Okay, you have an object of errors, text and stars. Does that kind of like as the back end, remember we have like our back end head on. We're kind of deciding how to send this data back. Kind of defining how to use our API. But now I would say, as far as me being a backend person, like the create method is working. And I have like, I have some basic error handling going on too. And now I can move on. I think this is a good time for a break. I'm going to create a repo. Does anyone have any questions on any of this?
Where would you be able to see a list of all of the error responses that exist?
HTTP. It can also be Wikipedia. These are some of the standard ones. I know at like Teleperformance, they would like come up with even some of their own. But yeah, these would be like kind of some standard ones. But yeah, you might have some unofficial ones that your company uses. 420, enhance your calm by Twitter. All right.
What about like, this is not a number or something like that? Like, where are those messages?
That, I mean, that would fit under a 422.
But how did it know to print that text? Is that just pre-programmed?
Oh, that's Rails valid. So I'm doing @fact. That's what I'm rendering, fact.errors. So that's a Rails thing. Rails is doing a lot of, so it's trying to save it, and it doesn't save, and then it's telling us why. So that's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes from Rails. And it's doing that because we're doing this. I think I can, like, how do I, there's message. You know, there's a way to like come in and do your own message. Forget the syntax. Is that? Yeah, okay. So you can change the message. Oh, unknown validator. There's a way, I'm just screwing up the syntax. But there's a way to come in here and add your own specific message. If you don't add your own specific message, it's just going to come up with, you know, oh, this one needs to be there. This one needs to be a number. So. Let's see. So I'm just creating this repo really quick. If you want to, you can take a break. Let's come back at, let's just call it 11. I'll stick around if there's any questions.
Hey, James, I have kind of a stupid, unrelated question if you're still there.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, go for it.
So I notice sometimes when you're in your VS Code and like, especially like when you do like the curly brackets, you'll finish the line and it like auto formats it and like adds spaces between the curly brackets and whatever you're writing in it. Or like if you do like single quotes, it'll change it to doubles sometimes.
Yeah.
Is that like a setting in VS Code or something? Or are you running a command?
Yeah, that's an extension. I forget which one it is. But yeah, and then it's I would, if you want to get that set up, it's the like format on save. And one way you can maybe just try to do it, and it probably has some default ways or default settings. If you do a Command Shift P and search for and start typing for like format, you can do like format document, or you can do a Command Shift P and then I think there's a save. So you can, yeah, click on that format document. So Command Shift P and start typing format, and it should find that format document.
Okay, thanks.
And then you can get that set up so where it saves automatically. There's also like Prettier will help with that with like JavaScript. There's also like, I know Prettier is the one for like JavaScript. It might work for Ruby. There's, I forget the one I use for Ruby. Maybe it's this Rufo. Yeah, this Ruby formatter.
Okay, cool. I'll do some playing around later probably. Thanks.
Cool. Let's get started. But before we get it back into this, I kind of want to do a side note. Just because there was just a question on this auto formatting. I kind of want to talk about it, why it's cool, why it's a little dangerous. But yeah, I don't know if you've noticed, I'm sure maybe some of you have. Let's maybe just see if I can. I'm just gonna, you don't have to do this, just kind of watch. If I have like, I'm just gonna create some like Ruby file. I don't know if you noticed, but I have this kind of set up where when I save, some auto formatting stuff can happen. Like if things are not tabbed align, I have single spaces. So right now I have some double quotes. This function's kind of a little off as far as the indentation is concerned. I hit save. It formats that function for me. It puts double quotes on all of this stuff. It automatically kind of does some of these things when I save, which is nice. Especially with stuff like indentation. You know, code that's like this, like that's correct. Like this is syntactically correct. Ruby doesn't care about tabs. Some languages do, but this is syntactically correct Ruby, but this is hard to read, right? Getting your indentations correct can do a lot for your readability. So this, you know, auto completing and auto formatting is a nice thing to have. There can be a little bit of a downside to it though, because or something you need to be aware of. And that comes, I think it's going to be less of a problem now, but this really becomes like a one of the issues with this is like your Git history. Because let's say you're working on a project with a lot of people, which is usually the case. And you're both using formatters, but you can kind of customize your formatters. Like maybe by default, you want to use single quotes. Let's say that's like your formatter uses single quotes and your friends uses, or your teammates uses double quotes. So I'm just going to go in and replace all of these double quotes. And then like person B's changes. Okay. So what I'm kind of assuming is like person A made all these changes and their formatter used double quotes. And then person B comes in and they add just this one change. And then they save and that changes all of the double quotes to single quotes. And then, you know, so I'm going to save this without format. So boom. So then they go in and they do a commit. B changes. Now this person only added one line of code, but they changed all these other lines. So if you go look at like the Git history and, you know, see the changes, there's all of these changes of just, you know, in Git of just going from the double to single quote. And then this makes your Git history like hard to read because really all I care about is like, this was really line 13 and this new line on line 14 were the only real changes. But now if I have to go back and try to read this, it's like, oh, this looks like this whole file has changed. So like, it's not such a big deal now when you're maybe not going through your Git history to try to find bugs, but if, you know, if you are using different formatters and they're kind of like you're not on the same rules, then it's going to screw up your Git history. Does that at least make sense at a high level? I'm a big fan of the formatters. I think they save a lot of time and they clean up your code. But with like DPL, just, and I don't think it's going to cause too many problems, but just note that is kind of the issue. If you're working on a big project with like a big team, you should definitely make sure you're on you have the same formatter. Because if now, like, say for example, because now we kind of have it the other way. If I go back to this file, because now if I'm James and I say like James changes, and I save that, now those are all changed. So I made this one change line 15, but then I go look at, you know, what I've actually done. Like we're going to get to the point with GitHub where we're going to have code reviews before you can even like push to master. Your code's going to have to be reviewed. And this would definitely be like reason for rejection to not approve your code. It's like, well, you changed all, like, you're just changing the quotes from single to double. Like, go fix that. We're not going to push that. Because really the only change that should be here is, you know, that one change that I made. That's what I should see in the Git history, because that's the meaningful work I did. Cool. Just a little Git side note and extensions, but there are, you know, I think there's one for Ruby called Rufo. That's a Ruby formatter. There's also Prettier. So those are ways you can, you know, set that up. You might have to like Google how to do that, like on autosave. But I'll kind of leave that up to you. You might not want to do that either right before a hackathon, but just throwing that out there. Cool. So let's get back into our assignment. So yeah, we have we're just kind of building out our backend. I'm kind of going to go a little fast through the rest of these methods, just because I think the backend is definitely the easiest part of this. So if we want like our show method, first of all, what we can do is we can do our set fact method, where we go ahead and, you know, just kind of take this code that we might do in multiple methods and throw it into one method so we can use it. So we're going to do like a fact.find params ID. So in all our, you know, a couple of our URLs, we're going to get the params ID, which should be the ID of the fact. So we can do that, and then we can do a before action, set fact. And, you know, we only want to do this on our, we'll do a show method. We'll do we want to do this on our destroy and our update, because those are all of our methods or routes that are going to get that ID. Cool. So our show method, this one's relatively straightforward. Render JSON at fact. So we'll use that before method to, on our show method, to find our fact, and then we'll just render that fact. And then once again, now I can test this with Postman. I might want to like do a get request to facts first, just so I can see my, like, the IDs. So I do want to facts first. Oh, I'm doing a post request, so I want to make this a get request. Cool. So I have a fact with ID 1, so I should be able to go to API fact/1. And there we go. That gives me my one fact. So just a quick test to see that show was working. I could do my update really quick. I can pretty much essentially just take my create It's going to be very similar. Except with my update, I just want to, because I find my fact, I already do that in my before action. So I just want to try to update it. So I'll sanitize my parameters, try to update it. If it's successful, we'll go ahead and render back that updated fact. If we don't pass any of the validations, then we'll get back the errors with the 422. So for my update method, and this might be something good to do just as like practice, this is a get API/facts to see if, as you're doing these, see if you can kind of remind yourself what the paths are, like kind of from memory, now that we've done this for a while. Now, even though we're doing our, Rails as an API, these are still the same. These paths are still going to be the same, right? And the other thing that we're kind of doing new, and this is just as like a design decision that we decided to do as developers, is we decided to append all of our routes with /API. We didn't have to do that. It's just something that we are going to do, just as like a nice convention. So this one's going to be a put, or a patch API facts ID. So let's go ahead and test our update method. So that's going to be a put API facts and then the ID. This one we do want to send, some data. So let's just do facts text here. So if I send this, because right now this is 5G causes COVID. If I update this one, now that updates the text on this. If I were trying to update this without a value, so it does have a value, but now I'm trying to update it to something without a value. Now I get the 422 error. The text can't be blank. So that did not actually update it. So if I do a get request back to that same one, I can see it's unchanged. Cool. So there's my update. And then I have one more, my destroy. So if I do a delete request to API/facts, and then the ID of the fact, that's going to come here to my destroy method. And I can just do this all in one line, render JSON at fact dot destroy. So this line of code will destroy the fact and then return it. And then we'll go ahead and render that fact back. So if I do a delete request to this path, that should delete whatever I passed in this ID param or in my URL. So if we go ahead and do localhost 3000 API facts 1, if I switch that to delete request, boom. So it deletes, it gives back the fact that was deleted. If I try to send this again, I get a 404 error because I deleted the fact with ID 1. So that's no longer in my database. So that's why I'm getting a 404. Couldn't find fact with ID equals 1. And yeah, there's my status right there, 404. That's different than a 422. So 404 is a very common one. So 404 is like your URL's bad, or like, for instance, it can't find the thing in your database. That's going to give you a not found. 422 errors going to be like an error where trying to create or update something and you're giving it bad data. It's like it can't update or create it. If I come in here and just like do a typo, like in my index method, like typo here, that's not valid Ruby. Do a get request to localhost API fax send. There's my 500 error. That's a server error because I have code in my server that's broken. So that's like the problems on the back end. That's not valid Ruby. Definitely whenever you get a server error, check out your server. Because I'm having a name error, undefined local variable, that word I just typed. I think this would be a good time to commit because now my backend CRUD is done.
Can you Slack out the controller, please?
Yeah. It's like I'm a controller. Slack. I'll also push that up. Cool. So we haven't done any React stuff. This is all just backend stuff. I think, especially at this point, this should be the easier part of this, right? We really haven't, as far as today's, like what we've been learning, there's really only one thing different that we did today, and that's appending our controller and our routes with this API. And that's something we don't have to do, it's just a convention. And there was two things with that. It's when we created our controller, we did a Rails G controller, then we do API / and then whatever like the name of our controller we want to create. So that's step one of that. And then step two is in our routes. Now we're going to do a namespace API, and then we're going to define all of those routes inside of that. So all our routes are going to be API / whatever. So, but as far as the back end, that's done. Questions on that? Cool. So now we can kind of like put on our like React hats, our front end hats. And as we're starting to work, there's going to be a little setup to kind of connect these two, but really when you're working on like, if you're just a back end person, you don't care about like what the front end is, like what are they, React or Vue, whatever. Similarly, when you're on the front end, you don't really care what the back end is. The back end could be Ruby, it could be Java, it could be Node. We just need to, the point of contact or like that middle ground is really the localhost 3000 Rails info routes. Like that is kind of like how the back end and front end people talk. It's the API. Like if you do a GET request to API fax, I'm going to give you back all the facts. If you do a POST request to API fax, and you have to give me some text and you have to give me stars, that's a number, I'll give you back a fact and I'll save it to the database. So I don't really care, like as we're talking about this, like the front and back end people really don't care what tech stack they're using. They just care about this kind of menu. So the back end person kind of defines this menu, and then the front end person like consumes it. So let's go do some of the front end stuff. All right, so to do that, we first need to create a React app. Now, I'm going to do this in my Rails project. So I'm going to stop my server. I'm going to do this within this project. It does not have to be in this project. The reason I'm doing this in this project is, or one of the main reasons I'm doing it in this project is so when I push this up to GitHub, it's all there. I have my React project and I have my Rails project. But they really are, I don't necessarily have to do this right here. It would still work if I did it in a different folder somewhere else. But here's how we're this is just how we're going to do it. Within your Rails project, I'm going to do a yarn create React app. So remember we've only done this one, but this is the way we created that standalone React application. This is kind of like doing the Rails new command. The yarn create React app, this is going to create a React app for us. And then we can give it, some name here. What I'm going to call this name, though, for this app, I'm just going to call it client. This is my client app. And since it's living in this directory, I know this is the front end for this project. And we're just always going to call this client just because it's a good name for that. But I could call this, front end, UI maybe. React with Rails, fun, React, W20, React, UI, but different names we could choose, but let's just call it client. So notice we're not going to do like gem install React and like bundle like Rails G React install. We're not doing that anymore. We're using create React app to create our React app. So here's another way to say it. Our Rails app is no longer rendering React. We used to do some server-side rendering of React, meaning our Rails would go in, create our React files, and then render them. We're not doing that anymore. Our React app is now just creating the React files. So they're literally two separate applications. Even though they're in the same folder, they're two separate apps. Okay, so now since I have two separate apps, I'm going to want to have two separate panes in my terminal. So I'm going to do a right click or a Command D to split my panes. And here in one, I can CD into client. This is like my React app. If I look at my code, boom, I now have this client folder, which is, there's my React app, the source folder, there's my app.js, my package JSON, all that stuff. So there's my React app, and I called it client. Cool. So inside of my clients, and inside of my source folder, I'm just kind of doing, so one thing about React that's different than Rails is Rails gives us a very defined folder structure. We have an app that has a controllers folder that holds our controllers. We have a models that holds all of our models folders. So it gives us a very defined convention and way to do your folder structure. React is not like that. React, we have a lot of say as the developer to say how we're going to organize our files. It's kind of up to us, actually. And so there's a lot of ways to do this. So just what we're going to do today, just is a very basic way. I'm going to come into my source, because this is where we're going to do most of our React stuff anyway. I'm just going to, in here, create a folder and call it components. I don't have to do this. This is not a functional thing. I'm just creating a folder where I'm going to put some of my React components. And then inside of here, I'm going to do a new file. Call this facts.js. And I'm going to write this first component. Import React from React. Call it facts equals, just do my basic functional component. Now, for the time being, let's just kind of not think about our Rails project. We just did a yarn create React app called client, and now I'm just creating this facts component. So how this works, because we did this once, but let's do a little review. With our create React app, what we have is we have this public folder, which we're never really going to use, but inside of here is our index.html, where we actually have our index, our HTML page, which has this one div in our body with ID root. And then back in our source, we have this index.js, where we take this app component and we use this React DOM function from React DOM to take our app and to find that element, that root element in our HTML, and like put all of our React stuff there. So notice how we have this app component right here, app.js. This is kind of like our main component. Right now it says edit src app.js and save and reload. If I want to see this, I'm going to go into my client folder. I'm going to hit yarn start. Now, if you're running your Rails, let me just do this so we can see this Rails S. So if you have a Rails server running, you're going to want to stop it. So if I do a yarn start, it's going to say, hey, because you notice how both of them are using localhost. But this one's going to say, hey, something's already running on port 3000. Do you want to run on another port? And we could, and it would work. I could say yes. Probably run it on like 3001. So if I go to localhost 3001, there's my app. But I don't want to do it that way. And it's just kind of like a convention we use here at DevPoint Labs. I'm going to stop my Rails server. I'm just always going to have my React run on port 3000. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have our Rails app run on port 3001 because they can't run on the same port. So now if I hit refresh, that's not going to work because this needs to be port 3000. All right, and so there's this app.js saying edit source app.js and save and reload. So if I come in here and I, delete this stuff, I hit save and it automatically reloads. If I want to render that like app component that we just made or that fact, go ahead and import it. So I import facts from, well, I first have to go into my components folder and then pull off facts. So I import that facts component. I can hit Command S, and there we go. Notice how now I don't have to hit this refresh button. I don't have to ask Rails for a new, to get the changes. I'm using the Create React App tool, and that does nice things like it auto reloads on save, which is super nice. So I just went in, I changed the file, and it's there. If we were doing server-side rendered React, I'd have to go hit refresh. It might take a couple seconds. But yeah, this is just automatically doing it for us. Cool. Questions on that? Cool. So yeah, let's say now I do want to so now I'm building this out. Well, now I actually do want to do an Axios call to get some data. Like I want to grab my facts right here. So here's what I'm going to do. Let's stop our React server. So make sure you're in the client when you do this. We want to add Axios. So now, whenever we're adding JavaScript packages, we're going to want to do it in the client directory because this is our React project. And yeah, and something we're going to do, because these, as we just saw, these both cannot run on port 3000. And just to keep things simple, it's not that we couldn't reverse these. We're just always going to have Rails run on port 3001, and we're going to have React run on port 3000. You could switch those up, but for all the demos I do, I'm always going to have it Rails running on port 3001. So how do I get Rails on port 3000 run? Well, I do Rails S, and then I do a -P for port, and then I tell it the port 3001. Now this is listening on 127.0.0.1. That is localhost, port 3001. So if I now go to localhost 3001, there's my Yay, You're on Rails page. So if I go to localhost 3001 API/facts, there are my facts. And if I start my React server, yarn start, see, now I have both of these running at the same time. And this is how you're going to have to do it. You're going to want to have both of these running. So that's localhost 3001. But if I go to localhost 3000, hit refresh, there's my React app. See how it's kind of, that's why here's another reason to kind of visualize. These are two separate applications. I have my Rails API running right here. I have my React app running right here. So that's something we haven't seen before yet.
Can you do that one more time? Like starting both servers in the right order?
Yeah, so let me close the terminal just to kind of do this, and I'll write this out in Slack. So you're going to want to make sure you're in your Rails project. So let me get out Slack here. So first step, make sure list one, make sure you are in your Rails project. Okay. So two, I would say this, you're going to split, have two terminal planes. Split terminal panes. Okay, so I make sure I'm in my Rails project. Can split this into two panes. I'm going to want one, have one be Rails. And one CD into client. So I'll have one ICD into the client. But even though they're like, I kind of want to get this, like, we're always going to throw these together just because of GitHub, but just because they're in the same folder, like just because my client lives in the like Rails app, these are think of them as two separate applications. So, if you really wanted, you just have to get these running separately. So how you would do it is, well, I would get into my Rails app and I would get into my React app. And then to start my Rails app, that's the Rails S command. But, since I'm going to be starting two servers, I need to put one on a different port, and that's going to be my Rails. So I'll say that Rails S 2001. And then yarn start. And then, so I run that one, that starts my server, my Rails server, just running on a different port. And then on my client, this is just a React app. So to run my React app is just yarn start. And then, yeah, so then localhost 3001, that's going to be pointing to my server. Localhost 3000 is going to be my React app. So if I want to check out my routes, I now need to go to localhost 3001 Rails info routes. So if I go to localhost 3000 Rails info routes, that's just going to render my React page. There's one more thing we need to do. And this kind of is a specific thing for like us. Since we have these running on, and this is why we're always going to have Rails running on port 3001, is we're going to set up a proxy. So in our package.json, in the client folder, we're going to find the package.json. I'm going to add this line, and I'm going to throw that out in Slack. So in client, package.json. Now I want to show you something, because in Slack, I kind of slacked it out like this. I want you to add this one line. I kind of throw this scripts here. I should actually say that scripts, not to add that, but it's just to kind of show you a place to add that. So you want to add this line, but it has to be, it doesn't necessarily have to be right above scripts. It just has to be at the root level in this object. See how this package.json is all surrounded by curly brackets? You just need to add this proxy JSON at the root level. Like I don't want to add that like in the dependencies list. And you want to add that just anywhere at the root level. So I'll just put it right by the scripts. Does that make sense? And what this is going to do, this is going to because since our React app is running on port 3000, when we do an Axios call, it would try to do an Axios call to port 3000, but our server's running on 3001. So when we do an Axios call, we want to do an HTTP localhost 3001. So that would kind of automatically do that for us. So we don't have to write this whole URL when we do Axios calls. We'll just automatically switch it to 3001. But this won't work if you run Rails on a different port other than 3001. But sweet. So that is our setup. Let me see here. If you look at this DPL sheets, so there's the Rails reference, but there's the React on Rails reference. This might give you some of those lines we need to add. It's a little more detailed than all the things you need, but there's the command we're going to use. That's the important one, that we use this -- API flag. And then here's the kind of a little bit on the routes, how we do the API namespacing. Here's the React setup, where we do the yarn create React app client, CD into client, add the proxy. So if you look at kind of just that, this might be a little too detailed, but there's that reference. I mean, I think that the key things that are different is this Rails new. Like if you really want like just a shorthand, we do our Rails new. Now I'll throw this in Slack. Then you do a yarn create React app client. Well, you first like CD into project name, whatever you called your Rails app. And here you could do normal database stuff. Like Rails G model. That's all you're doing there. Like your DB migrate, DB create, that all stays the same. We do, convention to namespace. Our controllers and routes, in the API, But really, that's as far as the Rails stuff is concerned. That's pretty much all it's going to be. You do this command, you CD into it like normal database stuff, normal model stuff. This part isn't even necessary, but we're going to start doing it where we use the API convention to namespace like our controllers and routes. And then for like the React stuff, we create React app client, add all, this shouldn't even be a $, add all JS packages in client. Example, yarn, add Axios, like those commands we're doing in the client folder. And then, yeah, I think the other thing that you have to have is this, in client package.json, add the proxy. How I would do this is either like with Trello or whatever you're using, as you're going through your homework today, go through these steps, document them yourself, kind of maybe explain that, like, it can also be a time where you can, like, if you're not sure what these are doing, you could go ask a TA or myself and like really create like a good resource for yourself that you could use for setting this up. Because this is how we're going to set stuff up from here on out. I do have, I know, like I have a Trello card for this. But I want you to come up with your own. I want you to document it yourself so it makes sense to you. Because I have a lot of these ones that are like different setups for different examples. Where's my, I should just have like a basic one. In a different folder. But come in here. I kind of want you to use it anyway, because I do want you to go through these steps and create this yourself. I swear I have one, but where is it? Because and you can also use this DPL sheets, but even this DPL sheets, I think for now, this is almost maybe even a little too much. But essentially it's going to look something like this. This is because it's really not, there's not that many steps. So we create our React app and then you CD into that and you do normal stuff. Except with the API, there's that small difference. For the React stuff, all we really need to do is we create that client folder, we add the proxy, and then we're pretty much good to go. So let's see this in action. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my use effect hook from React. Remember, use effect is a hook. We're going to talk more about hooks in like week 5 or 6. But we just give this a function to be run and this empty array as the second argument. So this function to be run is going to be called back when this component mounts. So I could do like a console.log mounted. A little weird syntax. Remember, use effect, it's a function. Its first argument is a function to be run. This is a callback function. And then the second argument is an array. And we're just going to leave that empty for the time being. And all I'm doing in my callback right now is just logging mounted. So if I run this, localhost 3000, I get my inspector open, check out my console. I have that mounted log. Cool. But what I really want to do is I want to get facts here. So I'm going to write this function called get facts, and then I'll define this function down here. This is going to be an async function. So here's where I'm like, let x equal, but I'm going to call this can be called anything. I'm either going to call it, I usually call it res and for response, or I'll actually type out response. So that's what this is. Response. So this is where I'm going to do my Axios call to my Rails server. So wait, axios.get API facts. Now, really, this is going to HTTP, localhost 3001. That's what that proxy is doing. It's just going to set up that for us, so we don't have to type that out. Since we set up that proxy, I can just do that API/facts. And we could console.log response. Axios is not defined, so let's go ahead and import that. Just manually do it. Import Axios from Axios. Something I might need to do, if I change my package that I added that proxy, I need to restart my server, my React server. So I think I didn't, I changed my proxy or my package.json, but that actually didn't, some of these changes don't reload. So since I added that to my package.json, I need to restart my React server. Let's go ahead and clear that console. Let's refresh. See, now that's working. See, and this is what the Axios.get, this is what that gives me back. There's a whole bunch of other stuff in here. There's a status text, headers, config. But the data object, that's what my server is rendering. So it's that response.data is what, that's coming back to me from my server. But Axios is formatting this other way, like where it's giving me this config, headers, request, status, and status text. What I really care about is this response.data. And that's my array of facts. But this looks, as far as your React component though, this looks the exact same as it did last, like for your homework, right? This is not really different than your homework that you did this weekend. The difference is your Rails app is not rendering that initial HTML page. Remember how in your Rails app, you probably had like I don't know, like an app function or something. And you had this render component. Whatever, I don't know, whatever you called it. And then in your Rails app, you had like a JavaScript folder. Like we don't even have a JavaScript folder in our Rails app. Because that's front end stuff. And our Rails app now is just an API. Why would we need a JavaScript folder? All of our JavaScript stuff is going to be living in this client folder because that's our React app. That's our front end app. So we no longer do that.
I'm getting an error that I don't understand. Can I
Yeah, you want to share it?
share?
Let's do some debugging together.
So it's waiting for an update signal.
That's already done.
Okay, but I'm not getting the list of stuff. So is this an error, this yellow thing? Get faxes assigned
No,
whenever used.
That's just a warning, but that's telling you why you're not it's like a warning. It's saying you've created this get fax, but you've never used it. So if you look at your code,
Oh yeah. So did I
you
miss a
have-
piece?
you have this const get fax, so you define it, but you never use it. Does that I think
Makes sense, but I'm not getting the list of facts. So
well,
do I need to do something else? Do I need to like call because
well,
you got
see,
to get facts.
yeah, it's more that warning is telling you, I mean, you've defined get fax, but you never use it. So why would you expect that to log the response if you never use it?
Right. Did you call it somewhere? Did I miss
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, so where you need to call it, where I called it is in the use effect.
Okay.
Yeah.
So would I put it in the where would I put it in the use effect?
So remember, you just, because this use effect, that first thing is just a function. So you see how you like log mounted. So how about after we've mounted, then we can get the fax. So get fax. But then you need to call that. Remember, get fax is a function. So you need to actually call that function by using the parentheses. Then if you refresh, there it is. Well, yeah, you don't see, this is nice. You don't even have to refresh, you just do it, you save it, and React will automatically refresh. you're gonna notice like the development is a lot nicer this way.
Cool, thank you.
Hey, James, I'm getting a whole different error where like my server is saying could not proxy requests from 3000 to 3001.
Okay, let's see, you want to share your screen?
Okay.
Yeah, this one's a little misleading. Will you hit Control C on, so this is, I would look at more your rels because it looks like there's some errors on your left side. You see anything? Get. Oh, that one looks. Let's try, will you restart your React server? And then, yeah, just go hit yarn start. And then let's look at, yeah, go hit refresh. Okay, so you're getting a 500 error. So definitely when you get a 500 error, if you go back to your server. Now you might be getting like this rels or this React error, but I feel like with this, whenever you get the 500 error, the information is probably going to be better on your React side. And these are.
React side, sorry.
Strange errors. Let me. It looks like it's trying to render HTML somewhere. Will you? Yeah. Let me look at this with you. Because it's one, right? Let's do this. If you want to, you can stick on, but I know it's lunchtime.
It's only 12.
What? It's only 12?
Only 12.
Well, what the hell? My computer says it's 12. Okay, you're right. Sorry. Let's take a break then. It is only 12, sorry. My computer says it's 12, but I'm used to it being an hour behind because I'm in California. But okay, let's take a break. Let's come back at 12, 15, and Mike, we can look at this.
Okay. I don't know if it's because this whole node thing that we were dealing with last time, like if I do node, it's still pulling 17.0.1, even though we removed it. So I don't know.
Yeah. Because, well, let's see here. Let me look at your. I don't.
I can blow it up bigger if you need.
Here, yeah. Stop your Rails server.
My Rails.
Yeah. Okay, now I'll just start it up again on port 3001. Okay, now just go hit refresh on your React server, on your React website.
Yeah.
Just reload that page. And then go back to your server. Okay, so that's the error. It's that one, the invalid HTTP format.
Oh, is it because Try to redirect to HTTPS instead of HTTP.
No, I don't. We don't need to do it. We don't need to do HTTPS.
Well,
'Cause-
so I think I accidentally put an S in here. I'm wondering if that's what's causing.
Oh, yes, yes. Let's go to your yes, go to your package JSON. No, that doesn't have an HTTP. Because that didn't have an S in it, did it?
It did. I just took it out.
Oh, okay. Sweet.
But let's see if I can restart it maybe.
Yeah, now restart your React server. I didn't notice that.
Okay, cool.
Sweet. I would have not caught. Good catch. I probably would have missed that S first. It would take me a while to find that.
Lucky guess, I guess. Okay, thanks.
Cool. Yep. Okay. So yeah, let's just go ahead, get started. I'm glad it's not one, 'cause I wanted to get a little more done. But really, essentially, what we're going to do now is going to be very similar to what you did last week. The setup's a little different. It's just a little different in how it's working. As far as the CRUD actions, now it's pretty much just going to be the same as your homework from last week. So if I'm looking at my facts.js, I'm now using my API. That, like, I could say, like, I'm a front-end developer, but you know, my back-end developer, I could kind of think of it like this, like my back-end developer has given me this API to use. And you know, I know if I do a GET request to API facts, I'm going to get all the facts back. If I do a POST request to API facts and send the data, for instance, I have to have text and I have to have text there, and I need stars to be a number. And you know, that's going to create me a fact. I don't care how the back end works. I could kind of almost think of it like that. So I know how it works since I wrote it, but I can really just also think about it this way. And it's nice. One of the things I think that we did that would really help you out on your homework is we used Postman to test our back end. So I feel pretty confident that my back end's working. It's not to say it's bug free, but like, since I did a pretty good job testing it, if I run into any errors, I'm probably gonna think it's like on the front end. So that's just a nice little thing I did for myself. So let's go ahead and kind of just, I mean, we have gotten our data, but we haven't really rendered it. So let's do that next. Because when we refresh our page, you know, we can see in our Axios call, we're getting back our data.
You're not a screen sharing.
Oh, yep, I need to share my screen. Thank you. Cool. So let's see here. Yeah, we're getting our data back, but we're not actually rendering it. So let's go ahead and set this up in our state. Use state. Let me see. Yeah, so this, we're just going to have this facts component. This facts component, I'm just making the decision right now that, you know, this is going to keep track of the state for our facts. Now, this might have been a little different than yet last week, where we kept track of our items in our app. It's, you know, doesn't really matter. I could do it here. So let's go ahead and create some state. Facts. And set facts equals use state. Cool. So what I want to do is, instead of logging the response, I want to set facts response, and it's actually the data, because what does see how the response, this is the response. It's an object that has this data key, it has this status key, has this headers key. What I really want my facts to be, my facts are the response.data. So that's what I'm going to set my facts to. Like, I can go ahead. I'm going to get rid of that console. And then clear my console. How could I check to see if my facts are set in my state? Well, remember how we have a components tool? that an extension that we installed into Chrome. I can go, because my state lives in my facts component, so I can go to my facts component. And I can see here, I have this state. It kind of doesn't, it's not so neat how it comes up. It just says I have this state array of objects, but there they are. There's my array of facts. Cool. So even though I haven't rendered them, I know they're there in my state. I now know facts. I can, this is just a really nice tool, you know, to see what your state looks like. So now I can go ahead, do a render facts function. I can go ahead and define. So here I can do something like, you know, if facts dot length equals 0, I can do some conditional rendering like facts. But if I do have something, then I can go through them, I can map over them. Facts.map. Go through each fact. Let's go ahead and just for now, let's just do something simple like fact.text. Remember my map function, it goes over each item of my array and it performs a function. And whatever that function returns is pushed into a new array, which the map then returns at the end. So I need to return my JSX for each, you know, of my facts, because it's going to go through each fact in the array, return the paragraph, and then once it's done, it needs to return that newly created array. And yeah, once again, I didn't have to hit refresh. You're going to see like, you know, this is going to save you a lot of times because this auto refresh is saving you like 2-3 seconds. And there are my facts there. Now, something I'm going to do just to keep my code clean, I'm going to come in here. I'm going to create a new component. Call it fact.js. Because this might get a little complicated. Like that, you know, I could really make a nice card out of a fact. And this JSX could be, you know, get kind of big and a little messy. So what I want to do is I want to just take all of this code and put it in its own component. Just a single fact component. Let's go ahead and import React from React. Fact. This is going to take some props. And for now, you know, I might just want to copy what I have here. I know maybe I'm expecting like a text prop, like paragraph props.text. Can just start this fact component out small, but I think over time this could grow. Like maybe it's going to have a form in here, or you know, we'll kind of see what happens. So now in my map function, I don't want to return this hard-coded JSX. I can just go ahead and return the fact component that I just created. And this has a text prop that it's expecting to get. So go through each of my facts. Let's map over them, meaning let's go create a new array. What's that new array I want to create? Well, I want to go through each of my facts and return a fact component. Looks like I got a syntax error in my fact.js. Notice now we're going to start getting better errors. This is another thing that's going to be a little nicer, is our errors on our browser are going to be better than what they were with when we were doing server-side rendering React with Rails. Now we just have a React app. We're going to start to get better errors. So syntax error line 1. What I did wrong here is that needs to be in a string. Import React from React. Here we go. If I look at my console, because I see this red X, so we can look at kind of see what's going on there. That's usually an error. This one's a little weird. Not found. Let's clear that. See if we get that again. Okay, this was the one I was expecting. That other one I just fixed with the refresh. So this warning, this is not an error, it's just a warning. It's not going to break your app, but I should fix this one. So each child in this should have a unique key prop. So whenever I do a map function or I create a list of something, I want to give these an ID and a key, and the key just has to be something unique, which is an ID is a good candidate for that because the ID should be unique. Now that error's gone. Now with this, I think it's good to with this one, I kind of do want to refresh because I want to clear the console, hit refresh and see if that error is still there. Because if I don't refresh, those errors are just, your console's not going to clear. You have to hit refresh to clear your console. Cool. So now I have that working. And yeah, instead of manually, because my fact also has stars, fact.stars, I could do that. But what I could also do is I can just, in the React component, I can just spread out over the object. If the thing you're doing, if my fact is an object, I can just spread out over it, destructure it, and then it'll give me the key as the prop name and then the value as the prop value. So I can just spread out over the fact, and that's going to work the same way. But I can go into my components. I can look at all these individual fact components and see how they have all of those props. They have the created at ID, source, stars, text, updated at username. If I take it back to just the way it was, now they're each only going to have text and stars, because that's all I'm giving them to them. This is just a really nice clean way to take an object and just pass all the key value pairs down. Start using this React dev tool. This will really help kind of, start helping you to visualize some of these things. All right. Like I said, other things I like to do is just do a border. So I could do an inline style just to see these components. Do a quick little border. Maybe a little bit of, margin and padding. It's really not for functionality or even looks. It's just more, I think, as you're starting out, you can start visualizing where these components are. Like my fax component now has a green border. Maybe make that a little more thick so it's a little more obvious. So there's my green border on my fax component. I could just copy this style, get it to this one, change the color. And then my fact components, now they all have like red borders. Just a little, I don't know if that's obnoxious, I can make them gray. It's the way to help start visualizing this. And then always you can also use your profiler. Cool. Yeah, and some other things you might want to do is, let's get all like, we have a text, we have stars. Stars, we have, an ID. Just might be nice to see all of these things. For these homeworks, we don't really care about how they look. But this just, it might be nice to, be able to see all this stuff. We have a username. What else do we have? We had a source. There we go. Let's see here. Let's do let's maybe just do a create really quick.
Could you Slack out the fax page for me real quick?
The fact or facts?
Fax.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go ahead and do a new, let's do a fact or like fact form component.
I keep getting an error saying it can't find the module fact.
That's probably, you probably forgot to import it.
I just copied what you slacked out and it gave me the same thing.
All right, you want to share your screen? I think this. Support fact. Okay, so yeah, hit refresh.
Oh, okay, never mind.
Yeah, you might. Yeah, when you get into some of these errors, and you make a change, so it does do the auto refresh. The auto refresh is not like 100%. So especially with an error, So I think it's always like, if you're still running into an error, try refreshing. There are a few random ones where you do need to restart your server. Like if you change your package.json. Another weird one, it's like if you do a pull request, and we'll not deal with that one yet, but think about it. If you're working with a partner and they add like Axios, like let's say you're working with a partner, they add Axios to their project, and then you do a pull request, you're going to have Axios in your package.json, but you're not going to have it installed. So you're going to need to run yarn to get Axios. You don't need to do yarn add Axios, you just need to run yarn to update that. So if your partner is adding packages in React and like they push up to GitHub, you need to clone, and then you're going to need to run yarn. It's very similar. It would be the same thing if your partner added Faker, like if you're both working on a Rails project and your partner added Faker and then pushed up, you would need to clone and run bundle to install whatever new gems they added. Let me share my screen. Let's just keep going. I'm kind of going a little, as far as this demo, like there's going to be the notes. I'm going a little off from the notes, but because once we get into, I think especially with React, I think React's a little confusing because there's not like this conventional way of doing things. You know, Rails is very nice where it's like, you put this in your control, like your controllers are generally going to look the same. Your models might look similar. Your routes might look the same. With React, it's like, I think what can really dictate how stuff works is how you want to build it. So you have a lot more freedom as a developer. So it's nice in that regard because it gives you a lot more freedom, but then it's not nice because then I think it makes it harder in some levels. All right, so yeah, I think it's better just to think about it. Oh, I need, like, what do I need? I want to do I want to create a new fact. You know, I could just do my form right here. I could start building out a form right here. But I can already say, like, think that's going to be a little messy. Why don't I just create a component for that? And call that fact form.js. And I'll kind of have that in its separate file. Just to keep things clean. So let's import React from React. Call it the fact form. And then, you know, with this form, I probably can reuse it like we did last time with update and delete. Basic form. Button. Maybe if I'm getting a little more comfortable with React, I can maybe do a little more code before I test it out. Like that takes an event. E.prevent default. Okay, I think that's maybe enough, kind of spilling out quite a bit. Export default. fact form. And just for, I'm going to comment that out for now too. We're going to want that, but let's just leave that commented out. So I have a fact form. It just has a simple, form. Should probably make this a submit button, type submit. So here's my form. It's just definitely not functional really. Just want to do some stuff. I can maybe just even do a console.log. Submit clicked. Maybe I just want to check to see that I have my, handlers kind of set up. So then I could do like a render that in my facts form. Make sure I import that. I'm using my autocomplete. Remember with the autocomplete, you can find that, import it. If I don't do that, I need to manually import it. So now I have that form there. I can do my console. Something's happening here. I'm refreshing my page, which is with React, you don't want that to happen. Why that is bad? Let me kind of go over why a refresh is bad. You don't have to do this because I'm just going to do this really fast. I'm just going to make a new file. I'm just going to do like a counter. Let's do a review of our counter. React. I'm also going to grab use state. So you can just watch this. So let's say we have a component like in this that is a counter component. And this component, just keeps track of our counter. So const count. This keeps track of how many times like a button's been clicked. We'll use state 0. So I have a counter. I'm going to set the default value to 0. Here's my state. Here's the way to set that state. I can have some, div counter, and I can have the value counter, and then I can have like a button add on click. Or just call a function set count to be count +1. All right. This was one of the first examples we did with React. We just had a counter component. We just have a button where it's every time it's clicked, we're just going to add 1 to this count state. And then in my app.js, or let's go ahead and use that here. Counter. Let's use that at the top so we can see it. Cool. Oh, I think I called that wrong. So I gotta go back to counter, call it count. So I have my counter and I can click add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I have this state, right? Now what I want to demo is why a refresh is bad. So let's say I come in here and I'm adding some text, like I'm adding a new fact here. I click add. Well, my counter state just went back to 0 because I refreshed my page. Just by default, this form does a full-on HTTP request and actually is going to do it's going to reload the page, like kind of behind the scenes hits that refresh button. But what if I have some other state in my app, kind of independent, that I don't want to get refreshed? Like my counter's at 20, like that's important state. I don't want that to change just because I'm adding a fact. And that's generally how your app is going to be. You're not going to want, if you do when you hit refresh, what happens is you reload all your components. When you reload all your components, these are all going to like default their state to whatever you have it as their initial state, which is generally bad. So you never, very rarely, and you're probably not doing things right if you do a refresh. I've seen it done. It's like, can sometimes be like a little hack that people will use to like get their update and deletes working or stuff like that. But it's generally not something you want to do. Does that make sense why you don't want to do it? Because you're going to reset all of your state and all of your other components, which you probably don't want to do. So that's why with our fact form, we need to do this, the E prevent default. Because the default behavior of a form is to do that request. But if I have that in there, now when I add, it will still, handle the submit, but it doesn't do the refresh. So my counter state stays the same. That's 13. I click add there. That's not changing, which is good. That's what I want to have happen. Cool. Let's start getting our inputs working. So for that, I'm going to want some state. So this is exactly how you did it last week, set text. Just going to create some state for each of these. So have these be an empty string. Could have them be null, doesn't really matter. Here I can have my value equals text set value, or sorry, on change, do my on change handler, set text. This is going to be I wrote this completely wrong. So on change, curly brackets, because I want to write some JavaScript. So I'm going to do a function that has an event object set text. This is going to be e.target.value. Here I can maybe start building out that object I'm going to want to send. Remember with JavaScript objects, if the key and value have the same name, I can do a shorthand like that. I can just omit the value and it will automatically kind of do that behind the scenes. So now if I add some text like new fact, click add, I'm logging that state that's in my form, which is good. Let's talk about, because let's do, like, we kind of have validations on our back end. Let's talk about some front end validations. Because we have like stars. Let's go ahead and create some state for this. Stars, set stars. So let's talk about maybe ways we can do some validation on the front end. So remember, our text has to be there. This needs to be here. And stars for now, we just had, the only validation we had is this just has to be a number on the back end. Let's go ahead and add our stars here just to make sure that's getting there. Okay. So there's one type of validation that's called HTML validation. I can put this because remember our text is required. So I can clear that. I click add. Now I'm notice how my console.log and my submit, this is not, I don't get this submit clicked. I click add, I don't get that log in my console. So that handle click callback is it's not even being called. Because I put in a validation right here, like saying, hey, this is required. I actually need to put something in here. So this is HTML validation. I'd say this is the easiest, which also makes it the worst option. There's two reasons this is the worst option. The first reason is you can't really change the style of this and like change that. Like you're kind of stuck with this, how that looks. So we're kind of stuck with the UI. The second reason that it's bad is like an elementary school kid could like break this. As far as like it being secure, it's not secure at all. Because you can just go into the HTML and just remove that. And there you go, now it works. So the security on this is like 0. So the one benefit of it though is not everyone's like trying to be a bad actor. This is just a quick, easy way, to let someone know. Well, I have to refresh because that's not there. To let someone know, to let your user know, hey, this is required. So it's not even going to try to go to your back end and create it. It's not even going to do the Axios call. It's just going to stop, give them a message and say, hey, you need to put something in here. So there's a lot of different kinds of validations. I'm pretty sure, I forget how to do it, but HTML validation, number. You can even do a range. You can do pattern. That's like your email. That's your regular expression. But yeah, I think there's a min max. So for our inputs, for our number one, we could do like a min max. Maybe we just want it to be 0 to 5. So if I do like 6, I need to fill that one out. If I do 0 to 5, is that working? Refresh. Maybe that needs to be an actual number. So this type equals number. I can't even this isn't even allowing me to type in anything. Well, I can manually type in 7. Let's type in that one, add. And then yeah, I'm getting that error. if I use the arrows, it like doesn't let me go below 0 or go above 5. But I can come in here, I can manually type in like 8, but it will say that less than or equal to 5. So it is something though. I don't want to say this is never use this. This is a form of validation that its main benefit is it's, you know, as far as a user, I might not know that stars, like I can, you know, is between 0 and 5. So if I come in here and accidentally try to click 8, it's not going to allow me to do that. And then it does give me a pretty good message, at least, of what's wrong with it. So we'll talk later. There's another kind of front-end validation where we could use JavaScript to validate. Like, right, I could do an if statement right here. If stars, I don't know, whatever. I could, because now I'm in just JavaScript. If stars, you know, is greater than 5 or, you know, stars less than 0. Like an alert. Like I could handle bad data here. And then I could have like an else, you know, if it's good, you know, do the Axios call here. So for now, let's just use HTML validation on the front end. We'll talk more about this. This definitely JavaScript validation can get like a little more complicated because all of a sudden we can start having nicer messages, more custom messages. Like, oh, if you know this is between 0 and 5, put a nice little like rainbow UI that's saying, hey, this is too big of a number. Like we could definitely do that with JavaScript. Does that at least at like a high level make sense, this JavaScript validation? You can try doing some of this on your own during homework. Cool. I would also say this, it's probably a little more secure, but I think the front end validation is more about letting the user know what they're doing wrong with the form. So it's more of like a UX thing. You're being friendly to your user, like, hey, you know, this email's been taken or this needs to be 6 characters long. It's being nice to your user. I would say if you're thinking about security, that's going to be your Rails validations. Those are going to be a lot more secure. Where you're not going to allow people to like, you know, add bad data to your database. That's really where you want to do that. Cool. And one other thing I want to do on my form, just because I like doing this, let's do some, actually I'm going to wrap this in a div. I'm going to wrap my form in a div. Just give it some style. It's kind of that. I'm just going to take one of my border styles here. I seem to be duplicating a lot of code, right? You kind of see how this border component is essentially the same thing. What's the one difference between all these styles I'm giving these?
Just the color.
Yeah, it's really just the color. Let's make a component for this. So I don't have to always copy and paste this code. new file. I could call this something like bordered. Or maybe I want to call this, I don't know, bordered. I think that border's fine, whatever. Or bordered div, sure. .js. I'm creating my own little like custom div component. So let's go ahead and import React. And I'll select this one out because I'll kind of go fast with this one. But these are the kind of things as you're like doing your homework, feel free to like create. If you see something you're reusing a whole bunch, maybe you'd be like, can I somehow abstract this and put it into its own component? Bordered div. And then what is this really doing? It's just kind of like this thing right here. You know, with JSX goes here, right? Does that make sense? What this comment, the JSX goes inside of here? Like this is kind of wrapping JSX. I look at like my fact. Now this is something we have not done. Because how do I like, because I want to be able to like have this wrap some JSX. So how am I going to do that? Let me just show you. On my props in React, I don't have to pass this. It's just kind of there. Is a props.children. It's this children prop. And what this children prop is, let's actually go ahead and use this export default border div. What the children prop is going to be is the JSX that's inside of this component. So let's go use this in my fact. I'm going to take, because this div is what I have in there. Border div, need to make sure I import that. Border div. And see this nested JSX, that's the props.children. See, it looks like I'm getting an error. So with errors, I want to look at my console, could also look at your server. I might just want to hit refresh too, see if I get that again. Yep. So your console, your inspect, oh, there it is. There's finally the error. Error border div, nothing was returned from rendered. This usually means return statement is missing. All right, that's a pretty good error. Am I forgetting my return statement? Yes, I am. So I could add a return here, return that. Clear that and refresh. Sweet. Now I have that border div. But with the fact, you know, I want this to have I want to be able to, though, to give it its own special color. Let's do, I don't know, red. All right, well, I can't just hard code gray here. I now want to use props, interpolate this and do props.color. So my style object, it's got the border. 4 pixels solid, and then whatever color they're giving me. Maybe I could also do something like this. Maybe I want to do here like const color equals props.color. Maybe I want to have the ability to have like a default color. Was I given a color prop? If I was, use that. If not, just have it be black or like gray. And then I can use that right there.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
Are these ternaries starting to make a little more sense? If someone gives me the color prop, use that. If I don't, use gray. Let's store that into a variable called color. Or maybe for more clarity, I could say border color. And now those are red. So now my fact form, now instead of doing all of this, well, I can now go use that border div, give it a color, green. I don't know, let's do, I think I've used green, orange. Or let's not give it a color. Let's just show you if I don't give it a color, it has a gray color. Because I didn't give it the color prop. But now if I do give it a color prop, purple. Now it's purple. And likewise, I have this in my facts. Don't want to use that anymore. Now I can use my border div. Color equals yellow. A couple nice things about this. First, I think it cleans up my code. Because now I'm reusing this component. I don't have all that inline styling. So I can create, anytime you can probably reuse some JSX, that's probably a good sign you want to throw it in its own component. Because let's say, down the road, someone says, hey, you know what? 4 pixels is not enough. I want this to be 5 pixels. Now, in the previous state, I would have had to go find those 3 places where I was using it, or 4 places, and go change all of them. Now I can just go right here and change my pattern, the pixel size right there. And now it changes all of the pixel sizes that are using it. Cool. And then because like my counter, well, my counter doesn't have one. Let's put one on my counter. But how these all are looking, this is actually, even though I've done very little with the styling, it's almost starting to look kind of good. Something that's looking good about this, just even though not much is going on, is simple things like my paddings and margins are the same. That type of thing, that consistency will make your app start to look a lot better. Because now if I go in here and, maybe I change my margin to 10, changes all of that margin to 10. So it's all like aligned. Got those nice Nice uniformity going on there. Cool. Oh my gosh, I went way too long. I know I haven't finished it, but do you think, just because based off your homework this weekend, do you think you could go ahead and finish the create with this example? It's nothing different, right? The CRUD actions are going to be the same. So I'm going to go ahead. Let's quit it here because it's getting late. I'm going to give you some time with this. I'm going to add this. We will definitely work, look at this, continue with this tomorrow. Any questions? Cool. Yeah, let's go ahead and call it good. Dude, I'm so confused what time it is. I have like, my phone says it's 12, my computer says it's 1. Okay, so it's 12 in California and 1 in Salt Lake. All right. Sweet. So let's meet back at 2:15. Does that sound good? Sweet. And I'll stick around for a second if anyone has any questions. If not, see you back at 2:15.